The Tao of Self-Confidence, Episode 701.
Welcome to the Tao of Self-Confidence, where I share stories of amazing women who have discovered their inner journey to self-confidence. Visit our website at thetaoofselfconfidence.com. Your inner journey to self-confidence awaits.
Well, hello friend. Welcome to the Tao of Self-Confidence, where I share stories of amazing women who have discovered their inner journey to self-confidence. I'm your host today, Sheena Yap Chan, and today I have an amazing lady on the show today. She's a clinical psychologist, and I'm really excited to have her on and share her story with us today on self-confidence. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Jamie Chiu. Dr. Jamie, how are you today? Maybe you can fill in a little bit more by yourself to the listeners.
Hi, Sheena. Thanks for having me on. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and partly is, when I was a teenager in my early 20s, I struggled with depression, anxiety, and bulimia. And it was just so hard to tell anybody. And I really felt that it was my problem, and I felt there was something wrong with me, and I felt so weak. And so I really tried my best to hide it, and I never tried to get for help. And so that really inspired me to become a psychologist. And my goal is to try to change how young people can get support for their mental health. And so what I've done is I work with schools to do mental health screening, but we've developed it like a interactive story so that students can feel comfortable and in a really friendly and safe way be able to share how they're feeling and be able to privately ask for help from a teacher or a school counselor. So I work with schools across Asia doing that. And I also have a private practice where I work specifically with girls and young women to overcome mental health challenges so that they can develop more resiliency and resourcefulness.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think that's great what you're doing, because mental health isn't really not talked about, especially in Asia, right? Asian upbringing, you're not nobody tells us, to share your problems or talk about our feelings. And, it starts from a young age, right? I mean, a lot of people have trauma from their childhood. So I think that's great, especially helping younger kids realize, we can start, if there is something, we can start fixing it or find a solution for it now. So thanks for sharing that. And Dr. Jamie, what's your cultural background?
So I'm originally from Hong Kong. So my family's from Hong Kong, but I grew up in Ghana. And then in my teenage years, I moved to Australia. And, it really resonates what you were saying about the Asian culture and not talking about feelings and not talking about what's going on. And that was really true in my family. So I grew up in a very traditional family where, my dad was the sole income earner and my mom was a housewife. And even though we're in Ghana, in Africa, we were very much in a very close-knit Chinese community of maybe 10 families. And so it was this strange thing of growing up abroad, but still in a very Chinese community. And the same happened when my parents split up. I was around 14 and we moved to Australia, and it was still very much a Chinese community there that my mom was always, hanging out with. And it's interesting to note that I think Asians who are living in different communities tend to be a bit more traditional than even what I found families in Hong Kong to be.
Thanks for sharing that. I totally agree. My parents migrated to Canada, and it's the same thing. We have a set of family friends. They're, same as us, and we're a tight, close group, right? It's just because, people migrate, they still do instill those Chinese values or Asian values that we have or that they've brought with them. So I totally agree with that. And, what's your favorite self-confidence quote?
My favorite self-confidence quote is from a psychologist I really admire, Dr. Irvin Yalom. And the quote says, "Sooner or later, she had to give up the hope for a better past." And this really resonates with me because especially during the times when I was struggling with my own mental health and in my teenage years, I was always feeling so much shame, about my past. I felt really embarrassed, and I would always replay incidents over in my head, and I always wish if I could be different. And I think also just growing up Chinese but in a different country, I was always the only Chinese kid in my class. So I always also kind of attributed that bit to my race, feeling so different and feeling like I didn't belong there. So sometimes I would think life would be easier if I was a white person. Life would be different if my family was still intact. So I was always trying to wish for a different past. But I think this quote really inspires me to think more about, or empowers me to know that I can actually do something about my current situation and my future if I only stopped, thinking so much about what could have been different.
Thanks for sharing that great quote. And in your own words, how do you define self-confidence?
I think self-confidence is having the ability to believe in yourself, to believe in yourself that you can learn and grow, and then be able to take constructive steps towards this kind of better state that you're imagining. It is not just about feeling good about yourself, but I think it's also being able to recognize good in others and be able to celebrate that with them and not have to feel threatened or feel like you're being compared or feel bad about yourself as well.
Thanks for sharing that great definition. And Dr. Jamie, what was your life like before your discovery of self-confidence?
I was very nervous. I was very anxious as a kid. And I think it's because, my family moved to Ghana when I was 6, and it was like a completely different place from what I had known. And I also didn't speak any English when I first moved there. So when I went to school, I was picked on. I was also the only, Chinese kid in the class. And I think that kind of instilled this feeling of like, I'm not good enough. And that really followed me, especially when my parents separated. But then my mom didn't have any, she didn't have like a financial earning power. And so even though we were separated and we were living in Australia, my dad was still in Ghana, we were still financially relying on him. And that also just felt very insecure, feeling that he could stop sending us money. And then what would we do? And so I think a lot of that insecurity and just constantly self-doubting and feeling like a bit of a burden to my family, thinking that, I could probably do better and wanting to do better as well.
Thanks for sharing that. And, what was that point in your life when you realized you can go out there and, have that confidence to, be who you are and just be, accepting yourself for who you are and, especially doing something like what you're doing with mental health? Like, what was that aha moment?
I would say it was less of like a big aha moment, but more of like smaller ones. But definitely, I would say I struggled a lot, and then I would have like a little kind of moment where something would click inside of me, and then my mindset shifts a little, and then I was able to see things differently, and that kind of kept happening. But I feel like one of the perhaps the more profound one was when I was in my early 20s, and my mom finally decided to divorce my father. So for a while, even though they're separated, there'll be a few years, and then they would try to get back together, and then it wouldn't work, and then they will, separate again. And so what stood out to me so much, and I guess what impacted me so much, was the fact that everyone else around my mom, all her friends and all her own relatives, were telling her not to do that because they were, very traditional mindset, thinking your husband makes money, you should stay with him despite everything he does. It doesn't matter if he's having an affair, as long as he still recognizes you as a wife, you should stay there. And I think just seeing my mom stand up for herself and move away from this, relationship and be able to say, no, I'm doing this for myself. And I really felt like that inspired me to be strong, because I was like, well, if my mom could do it, she, didn't go to school much. She never really worked, but she's willing to take that risk to do something just for herself. That made me feel like, well, then that means that I can do it too. And so I feel like that was one of the aha moments that really got me.
Thanks for sharing that. And, it's great that your mom was able to stand up for herself, because there's a lot of Asian families out there and women who feel like they're trapped in their marriages, right? Living in Asia, you hear all kinds of stories and, it's sad at the same time, and because they feel like there's no way out there or no way out for them. But, like you mentioned, here's your mom who never went to school. She wasn't the income earner, but she's willing to stand up for herself and realize she deserves better, and which inspired you to realize anything's possible, right? And because of that, what's your life been like now?
I would say I still definitely pay attention to, confidence is a big theme that I often try to reflect on and work on, especially just given my own, history with my own mental health. It's always a struggle, and self-doubt tends to kind of be my default mode, but I try to consciously and intentionally, put effort into it so that I can carry myself differently. I catch what I say. I think that's been a big exercise of mine, is always just catching how I talk, because I really feel like how we talk shapes a lot of how we think about ourselves. So whenever I would say things like, oh, I'm not good at this, or over apologizing, I would catch myself and be like, no, don't say that. What's a more confident way or a better way to express, what I want to say? And I feel like that's kind of helped me continue to grow in my own confidence, my own self-belief. Another thing is that because I work as a therapist, so oftentimes I would ask myself, what would I do, or how would I act differently, or how would I respond to certain incidents if I knew, let's say, my patients were here with me and they could see me. It's like, how could I always live up to certain ideals and standards and set a good role model for them as well, even though, they wouldn't know what I do in my own time, but I feel like I would want to be the kind of person that, young girls can look up to and feel like I'm a model for them.
Thanks for sharing that. And, to the woman who's listening to your episode, she may be in her own journey to self-confidence. What would be that one tip you would give to her?
Well, actually, even in my own therapy practice, self-confidence comes up a lot as a frequent theme, especially because I work with girls. And I think this is a very women-specific issue as well. I mean, of course, men struggle with it too, but I think women have like a different set of challenges. One thing that I've always found very powerful to work with, and I think this is something that any woman can do on their own, is to sort of examine their own beliefs around self-confidence. Because I feel like a lot of women worry that if they're confident, it means that they become arrogant, or if they're confident, it means that they're going to be a jerk to people, or that they have to, always bring the attention to themselves. And some people also worry that if to be confident or be content in oneself means that you're not going to grow and you're not going to try to do better. So I feel like being able to first sort of identify, are there any beliefs that aren't that helpful for you and might actually be holding you back, and be able to kind of directly confront them and see how you could reshape them into something that is more constructive for you.
Thanks for sharing that great tip. And if our listeners wanted to get to know a little bit more about you and what you do, or check out some of your work, is there any links or social media profiles we can connect with?
Yes, they can check out my Twitter. My handle is @I'mJamieChiu, or they can go to the website for my work with schools, which is thebrightlyproject.com. They can sign up for our newsletter there.
Thanks for sharing that. And to our listeners, if you want to connect with Dr. Jamie, you can also head on over to theselfconfidence.com and search for Dr. Jamie's name. Her show notes will pop up along with everything else that we talked about. And I really just want to thank Dr. Jamie today for taking the time to share her story and tips with us on self-confidence. So thank you so much, Dr. Jamie.
Thank you, Sheena. This was fantastic. Thank you.
Not a problem. It was really great having you on the show. And to our listeners, be on the lookout for another new episode of another amazing woman's journey to self-confidence. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to another amazing episode of the Tao of Self-Confidence. Get your free self-talk tape for building self-confidence by visiting our website at thetaoofselfconfidence.com. Your inner journey to self-confidence awaits.